Have you ever truly wondered what dark, unsettling secrets truly lie buried beneath the polished veneer of American history? What unspeakable truths are meticulously hidden from the public eye, deemed too disturbing, too utterly horrifying, to ever become widely known, let alone enshrined in our popular lore? This is precisely one of those stories. A meticulously documented case, extracted from forgotten archives and suppressed files, now finally, reluctantly, brought into the stark, unforgiving light. It begins, as so many of our nation's deepest anxieties do, in the quiet, historically charged heart of Salem, Massachusetts, a town forever etched into our collective national psyche, its name synonymous with a specific dark period that most people believe they understand, neatly categorized and filed away. But what if those historical accounts, those tidy narratives, only scratch the surface of a much deeper, infinitely more terrifying reality? What if the true horror of Salem never truly ended, but merely retreated into the shadows, waiting for its moment? On a specific, profoundly unholy night, under the cold, silent, and utterly complete gaze of a rare total lunar eclipse, a celestial event of profound ancient significance, an entire family, the last surviving members of an unbroken ancient lineage, were simply wiped from the face of the earth. The Smith family, direct and undisputed descendants of some of Salem's earliest, most influential European settlers, were not, by any stretch of the imagination, victims of a random act of violence or a tragic, inexplicable accident. Their end was an intricately orchestrated event, a chillingly precise act born from centuries of forgotten promises, of sacred pacts broken, and a blood price finally, brutally, demanded with an unholy appetite. Their ancestral home, a sprawling, imposing colonial structure, stood as a stoic, silent sentinel for over 300 years on a forgotten, overgrown lane just beyond the manicured tourist pathways. This was no ordinary house. Even before the tragedy, whispers clung to its ancient facade, but now its very timbers seemed to weep a strange, viscous, reddish substance, a pervasive, unsettling dampness clinging to every warped floorboard, every cracked pane of hand-blown glass. The very air inside this decaying monument hung heavy, thick with the oppressive scent of old damp wood, centuries of accumulated dust, and something else, something undeniably primal, profoundly malevolent, and disturbingly, impossibly old. Mirrors within its shadowed rooms did not just reflect static images, they seemed to hold fleeting, indistinct shadows that belonged to no living soul, chilling specters of a past that stubbornly refused to lie still, actively devouring the present. When dawn finally broke, casting its first weak, hesitant rays over the silent, unsuspecting town, what was discovered inside the Smith residence defied every logical explanation, every rational thought pattern known to modern forensic science. The bodies of the entire Smith family lay grotesquely contorted, arranged in impossible, almost sculptural configurations, marked by archaic, unsettling symbols that spoke not of modern violence, but of a time long, long before these colonies were even a whisper in the wind, dark echoes from a forgotten, ritualistic past. The local authorities, immediately, terrifyingly out of their depth, found themselves confronting a scene that wasn't merely a crime, but an abomination so profound, so utterly inexplicable, that it transcended all conventional understanding. It was then, and only then, that specialized investigators, those rare few who dealt exclusively with the truly inexplicable, the profoundly unclassifiable, were reluctantly, desperately called in, initiating a formal but deeply troubled attempt to document and understand what truly occurred within those cursed walls. This is the official yet little-known documented account of their desperate, often terrifying struggle to comprehend what exactly transpired on that macabre night. To meticulously piece together the fragmented, chilling evidence of a horror that had festered within the Smith bloodline for generations, an intimate, terrifying inheritance tied to a ritualistic curse directly forged during the infamous yet widely misunderstood Salem witch trials. A dark binding pact that had lain dormant for centuries, patiently waiting for its climactic celestial moment, a total lunar eclipse, to finally, brutally, claim its monstrous due. We are not talking about some abstract, distant cosmic horror here, some ethereal threat from the void. This is something far more intimate, far more chillingly terrestrial, a vengeful evil, born directly of human sin, of profound betrayal and broken promises. yet wielding a power that utterly defies all scientific understanding, all rational explanation. An unholy pact, forged in the shadowed, often bloody origins of this very nation, demanding the ultimate unthinkable sacrifice from the last of a cursed bloodline under the cold, indifferent gaze of a final eclipse. This isn't just a tragic story about a decaying house or an ordinary American family. It's a harrowing journey into the dark, often suppressed heart of American history itself, confronting the chilling, undeniable weight of a nation's shadowed origins and the relentless, patient predator that history can become when its forgotten, unholy debts finally, inexorably come calling. The initial chaos inside the Smith residence, a maelstrom of fear and disbelief, demanded a steady hand, a mind utterly unburdened by superstition. Local law enforcement, stretched thin by the sheer grotesqueness of the scene, quickly recognized the need for an authority beyond conventional forensics. Their call reached Dr. Aris Thorne, a man whose reputation preceded him across academic and investigative circles. Thorne was not a sensationalist seeking the supernatural. He was a bastion of empirical data, a relentless advocate for the measurable, the provable, the fact-based. Dr. Aris Thorne, a distinguished professor of historical criminology at Boston University, had built his career meticulously, brick by painstaking brick, on the deconstruction of the inexplicable. His early work had focused on the social psychology of cults, examining the mechanisms through which belief systems, however outlandish, could compel individuals to horrific acts. He saw human behavior as a complex interplay of environmental factors, psychological predispositions, and historical precedents, never as the result of spectral influence. His face, etched with the subtle lines of years spent poring over dusty archives and grim case files, often conveyed a quiet, almost weary intelligence. His eyes, keen and analytical, missed little, but their default setting was a profound skepticism toward anything that ventured beyond the realm of rational explanation. Thorne was a scholar, not a ghost hunter. He believed in the power of the human mind, both in its brilliance and its capacity for self-deception and collective delusion. For Thorne, every anomaly, every inexplicable detail was merely an unexamined variable, a puzzle awaiting its logical solution. He approached the Smith family tragedy with the same detached, clinical precision he applied to every case. He saw the archaic symbols not as signs of an ancient curse, but as potential psychological triggers, remnants of some forgotten local law, or perhaps even a deliberate, albeit bizarre, staging by a perpetrator. The impossible configurations of the bodies were, to him, a challenge to forensic science, a test of the limits of physical manipulation, not evidence of an ethereal force. His methodology was a relentless pursuit of the mundane truth, however unsettling it might appear on the surface. He would systematically eliminate every conventional explanation before even entertaining the possibility of an outlier, and even then, he would seek a scientific framework, no matter how novel, to contain it. When first contacted by the authorities regarding the Salem incident, Thorne's initial response was characteristic. He asked for detailed forensic reports, toxicology screens, and a complete psychological profile of each Smith family member, living and deceased. He wanted to understand their daily routines, their relationships, their financial situations, any known conflicts or personal struggles. He inquired about the house itself, not for its alleged haunting, but for structural integrity, potential environmental hazards like mold or lead paint, or any signs of forced entry. He was searching for the human element, the tangible cause, the perpetrator hidden in plain sight, or the psychological unraveling that could explain such a horrific outcome. He considered environmental toxins, familial cult activity, or even an elaborate ritualistic murder-suicide pact far more plausible than any notion of a curse. He had lectured extensively on the Salem witch trials, not as a period of genuine demonic possession, but as a chilling historical case study in mass hysteria, community paranoia, and judicial overreach. He argued that the fear, the accusations, and the resulting executions were products of deeply entrenched societal anxieties, economic pressures, and pre-existing rivalries, all amplified by a potent mixture of religious fervor and ignorance. He saw the human capacity for cruelty and delusion as far more terrifying than any imagined supernatural entity. This academic grounding formed the bedrock of his professional identity. The very mention of Salem as a site of alleged supernatural activity immediately raised his academic hackles, signaling a need for even greater empirical rigor. He understood the psychological landscape of places steeped in such dark folklore, how easily suggestion could take root. His initial visit to the Smith home was methodical. He moved through the decaying colonial structure, not with trepidation, but with the methodical gait of a surveyor. His focus was on the empirical. He documented every detail with photographic precision, noting the unusual reddish substance on the walls, not as weeping blood, but as a potential biological contaminant, a unique type of fungus, or an unusual paint additive. He sampled it, catalogued it, preparing it for multiple independent laboratory analyses. The reflections in the mirrors, which others described as shadowy anomalies, Thorne saw as optical illusions caused by old glass, ambient light, or perhaps even psychological projection from witnesses unnerved by the scene. He believed the mind, especially when exposed to extreme trauma or prolonged stress, could conjure horrors where none existed, shaping perception to fit a preconceived narrative of dread. He observed the air, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust, attributing any ancient and malevolent quality to the natural decay of a centuries-old structure, perhaps combined with poor ventilation and the lingering stench of tragedy. He interviewed every responding officer, every initial investigator, carefully dissecting their testimonies for signs of confirmation bias, subjective interpretation, or emotional contagion. He looked for inconsistencies, for details that contradicted a supernatural narrative. Thorne's strength lay in his ability to maintain unwavering objectivity in the face of the profoundly disturbing. He approached the bizarre with an unshakable commitment to the scientific method. Observe, hypothesize, test, conclude. His goal was to strip away the layers of myth and fear to find the rational core, however dark, beneath the inexplicable surface. For Aris Thorne, the true horror was always human, a product of our own making, our own psychology, our own history. The idea of a blood price, or a centuries-old curse, was, to him, a symptom of human fear, a narrative construct to explain that which felt overwhelming and uncontrollable. The challenge of the Smith case, he acknowledged privately, was its sheer defiance of conventional explanation. But defiance did not equate to impossibility. It only meant the true explanation was more complex, more deeply buried, requiring more rigorous application of his scientific principles. He was prepared to dig, to unravel the historical threads, to confront the deepest psychological aberrations. His tools were reason, evidence, and an unwavering belief that every mystery, no matter how ancient or seemingly arcane, ultimately yielded to the cold light of scientific inquiry. He saw the case as the ultimate intellectual exercise, a test of the boundaries of human understanding, not a confrontation with the supernatural. He would find the truth, even if it meant exposing an uncomfortable reality about human nature or a long-forgotten historical crime. The first responders, trained professionals accustomed to the depths of human depravity and tragedy, found themselves unnerved. What they discovered at the Smith residence transcended the grim familiarity of violent crime. It was a scene that defied categorization, pushing the boundaries of their rational understanding. Local authorities, overwhelmed by the sheer, unsettling peculiarity of it all, swiftly elevated the case, summoning a specialized, often discreet team. Leading this unusual endeavor was Dr. Elias Thorne, an American academic whose work at the intersection of historical criminology and preternatural folklore had earned him a quiet but formidable reputation. His arrival in Salem was less about solving a conventional murder and more about deciphering an ancient, forgotten language of horror. The Smith house, a relic of early colonial settlement, stood shrouded in the cold dawn light, its gabled roof and weathered clapboards a testament to centuries of silent witness. Yet silence was not what filled its decaying rooms. An oppressive stillness permeated the very air, a heavy quiet broken only by the low hum of forensic equipment and the hushed, almost reverent whispers of the investigators. Stepping across the threshold, Thorne was immediately struck by the house's profound, almost sentient decay. The scent, as described in preliminary reports, was indeed a complex tapestry of old wood, dust, and something else, a metallic, cloying odor beneath it all, not quite blood, not quite rust, but something undeniably ancient and malevolent. The crime scene itself was a tableau of unimaginable horror. The Smith family, father, mother, and 2 children, lay scattered throughout the ancestral home, their bodies twisted into grotesque, impossible configurations. Limbs bent at unnatural angles, faces frozen in expressions of primal terror. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no conventional wounds. Instead, each victim bore faint, intricate markings on their skin, symbols that defied modern interpretation, appearing to be seared onto the flesh without a discernible heat source. Thorne immediately recognized their archaic nature, hinting at forgotten rituals and long-dead languages. These were not the crude symbols of a disturbed mind, but the precise, almost calligraphic etchings of a purpose-driven hand. In the parlor, where the eldest Smith child was found, a large, ornate mirror hung above a disused fireplace. Thorne approached it cautiously, his breath fogging the dust-laden glass. Local reports had mentioned disturbing reflections. He saw his own image, distorted by the aged silvering, but something else lingered at the periphery of his vision. Not a shadow, but an absence of light within the reflection, a fleeting, almost imperceptible void that seemed to shift and coalesce. It was as if the mirror absorbed light rather than reflected it, especially in the deeper recesses of the room. The forensic team, focused on gathering physical evidence, dismissed it as a trick of the antique glass, but Thorne felt an inexplicable chill radiating from its surface, a cold that seemed to sink into his very bones. Deeper into the house, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air colder. Along a damp, peeling wall in the dining room, a reddish substance, thick and viscous, seemed to weep from the plaster. It was not paint, not rust, and laboratory tests would later confirm it was not blood. Its composition remained stubbornly anomalous, a chilling mystery that defied all known organic or inorganic compounds. As Thorne examined it, a subtle pulsation seemed to ripple beneath the surface of the reddish ooze, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor that suggested not a natural seepage, but a controlled, deliberate exude. He pressed his gloved hand against the wall, feeling a faint vibration, a rhythmic thrum that resonated not through his hand, but deep within his chest, a sensation akin to a faint, distant heartbeat. This was the first true contact. Not a visual apparition, not an audible whisper, but a tactile, visceral experience that transcended the realm of the explainable. The house was not merely old, it was alive with something ancient and malevolent. The chilling weight of centuries of history seemed to press down, demanding recognition. Thorne, a man of science and reason, felt the hairs on his arms rise. This was not a crime scene born of human hands. This was a place where the veil between worlds felt terrifyingly thin, a crucible where history had been twisted and a price had finally been collected. The investigation had shifted, irrevocably, from the realm of the known to the terrifying precipice of the unknown. They were no longer simply documenting a tragedy, they were stepping into a legacy of horror, making their first terrifying contact with an evil that had slumbered for generations, patiently awaiting its moment under the final eclipse. The first responders, trained to compartmentalize the gruesome, found their composure fracturing the moment they crossed the threshold of the Smith family home. Even before the specialized teams arrived, the local police had reported an unshakable sense of dread, a palpable weight in the very air of the colonial house on Willow Creek Lane. It wasn't just the sight of the bodies, a horror in itself, but the chilling sensation that the house was somehow alive, subtly hostile, watching them. This wasn't a crime scene, it was a ritual ground, a stage set for an unimaginable final act. When the multidisciplinary task force finally arrived, led by the renowned forensic anthropologist, Dr. Alastair Finch, the initial shock gave way to a chilling professional bafflement. Finch, whose career spanned decades of examining the most depraved and inexplicable deaths, found himself speechless. The Smith family, father, mother, and their 2 teenage children, lay in a grotesque tableau within the living room. Their bodies were contorted beyond any natural post-mortem rigidity, limbs twisted at impossible angles, faces frozen in expressions of primal terror. It was as if they had been violently folded, their bones somehow rendered pliant before setting into these nightmarish configurations. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no evidence of a forced entry. The house itself remained pristine, save for the horror it now contained. The most disturbing element, however, was not the arrangement of the victims but the markings etched into their flesh. Ancient symbols, unlike any known modern script, were seared onto their foreheads and the palms of their hands. These weren't crude carvings. They were precise, almost branded, yet there was no evidence of an external heat source, no scorch marks on their clothing or the surrounding environment. The skin around the symbols was a pallid gray, contrasting sharply with the lividity of the rest of their bodies. Dr. Finch, after a careful examination, noted a faint, almost imperceptible pulsation emanating from these markings, a phenomenon he had no scientific framework to explain. As the team moved deeper into the house, the atmosphere thickened, becoming almost claustrophobic. The scent, initially dismissed as the smell of decay and old dust, began to assert itself as something far more complex and insidious. It was acrid, metallic, yet with an underlying sweetness that hinted at something organic, something dying or decaying in an unnatural way. This smell seemed to cling to the very fabric of the house, permeating the ancient wood, the faded wallpaper, and the heavy drapes. It was the smell of forgotten blood, of a long-held secret festering in the foundations. The walls themselves presented the next major anomaly. In the hallway leading to the master bedroom, and particularly within the small unused study, a reddish, viscous substance seeped from the plaster. It wasn't uniform, but appeared in long, slow-moving rivulets, like frozen tears. Initial field tests were inconclusive. It wasn't blood, not human, not animal. It had properties that defied classification, a biological compound unknown to contemporary science. Finch's colleague, Dr. Lena Petrova, a renowned forensic chemist, collected samples with a distinct look of unease. "It's alive," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Or it was, recently. And it's interacting with the plaster on a molecular level. It's becoming the house." The mirrors prominently featured throughout the Smith residence, especially the large, ornate antique mirror in the parlor, proved to be another source of profound disquiet. The premise had stated they reflected shadows that belonged to no one, and the investigators quickly experienced this firsthand. As agents passed by them, fleeting distortions appeared in their reflections, elongated figures that stretched beyond their own forms or darker, indistinct shapes lurking just at the periphery of their vision. Several investigators reported a sensation of being watched from within the reflective surfaces, a cold, alien gaze that sent shivers down their spines. One veteran FBI agent, a man hardened by years of confronting the worst of humanity, stood before the parlor mirror and swore he saw a faint, skeletal hand reach out from within his own reflection, only to vanish the instant he blinked. Beyond the immediate horror of the scene, the house began to subtly assert its influence. Electronic equipment experienced intermittent failures, cameras freezing, voice recorders picking up static, or an unsettling low hum that wasn't present in the environment. Finch's specialized sensors, designed to detect subtle energy fluctuations and electromagnetic fields, registered spikes and anomalies that defied known physics. The data was erratic, suggesting not a malfunction, but an active, intelligent interference. It was as if the very dwelling itself was resistant to their intrusion, a silent guardian of its morbid secrets. As the daylight began to wane, casting long, unsettling shadows through the dust-laden windows, the team's initial scientific detachment began to fray. The rational explanations, the hypotheses of a deranged killer or occult ritual, simply crumbled in the face of the mounting evidence. This was not merely a crime scene. It was an archaeological dig into an impossible past, a confrontation with a force that was ancient, intimate, and profoundly malevolent. The first anomalies had been catalogued, but they only deepened the mystery, confirming that the Smith family's final night under the eclipse was just the culmination of something far older, far darker, and utterly beyond comprehension. The flickering fluorescent lights of the makeshift command center cast long dancing shadows across the grim faces of the investigators. Dr. Eleanor Vance, her gaze sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles, stood before a whiteboard riddled with dates, names, and chilling symbols painstakingly transcribed from the Smith residence. The initial shock had given way to a grim determination, a collective refusal to dismiss the macabre scene as a mere homicidal frenzy. The anomalies were too profound, the symbols too ancient, the very air of the house too saturated with an inexplicable dread, a silent testament to a terror that had festered for generations. Their breakthrough began not in the blood-stained bedrooms, but in the forgotten corners of the Smith property, a house that seemed to breathe with its own ancient malice. A sealed-off section of the cellar, concealed behind a false wall of rough-hewn timber, yielded its secrets with a groan of decaying wood. Dust-choked air, thick with the scent of stagnant earth, mildew, and forgotten centuries, enveloped them as they uncovered a series of meticulously preserved leather-bound journals, some brittle with age, their pages crumbling at the slightest touch, others surprisingly intact, spanning from the late 17th century well into the modern era. These weren't mere family chronicles. They were a chilling testament to a lineage burdened by an inescapable doom, a chronicle of a house that had become a generational prison. The earliest entries, penned in a spidery, desperate script by one Prudence Smith, dated to 1692, the very height of the Salem witch trials' hysteria. Her accounts detailed a harrowing period of fear and suspicion, a community devoured by its own paranoia. But more disturbingly, they spoke of a desperate, unholy bargain. Faced with accusations of witchcraft herself, a fate that promised an agonizing death, Prudence, in a desperate bid to save her own life and preserve her family name from utter ruin, had deliberately and falsely denounced a neighbor, an elderly, reclusive woman named Elara Croft. Elara, known for her peculiar herbal remedies, her fierce independence, and her defiant refusal to conform, had been an easy, convenient target for the town's ravenous hysteria. But Prudence's journal revealed a sinister twist beyond mere human treachery. Elara, as she was dragged to the gallows, her eyes burning with a terrible, otherworldly fire, had not merely cursed Prudence with human malice, but had laid a generational blight upon her entire bloodline, a curse rooted in blood and betrayal, intertwined with the very fabric of the Smith family's future, forever binding them to a karmic retribution. Clara's final guttural words, recorded verbatim by Prudence in a hand trembling with a fear that transcended mere human terror, spoke of a debt to be paid, a forfeiture demanded by the earth and the heavens themselves. It was not a simple death sentence, but a methodical, agonizing unraveling of the family's prosperity, their sanity, and ultimately, their very existence, designed to strip them of everything they held dear, generation after generation. The curse was not one of immediate retribution, but a slow-burning fuse, ignited by a profound act of betrayal and meticulously designed to culminate under specific celestial alignments, the lunar eclipses serving as the unholy clock. The journals meticulously detailed recurring tragedies throughout the centuries, sudden, inexplicable illnesses that withered family members from within, mysterious fires that consumed their livelihoods, bizarre accidents that claimed lives in the most gruesome ways, each occurring with unnerving precision during lunar or solar eclipses. These events were dismissed by local historians as unfortunate coincidences, the grim realities of colonial life, but within the meticulously documented Smith family archives, they formed an undeniable, terrifying pattern, a drumbeat of doom leading to the present. As Dr. Vance delved deeper into the Smith legacy, her fingers tracing the fading ink and increasingly desperate prose of successive generations of Smiths, a chilling clarity began to emerge from the historical fog. The curse was not merely a threat, it was a hungry entity, a malevolent force sustained by periodic ritualistic sacrifices, culminating in a grand, final consumption of the entire lineage. Each eclipse marked a moment of heightened vulnerability, a gaping maw for the malevolent force to exact its escalating toll. The archaic symbols found etched into the Smith family's bodies, initially indecipherable and baffling to forensic experts, began to appear with increasing frequency in the journals, sketched alongside frantic warnings, desperate prayers, and crude attempts at counter-rituals. They were not mere arcane scribbles, but a rudimentary form of protection, a desperate attempt to ward off an entity that craved more than just life. It craved the very essence of their bloodline, a chilling, unholy appetite for ancestral sin. The most recent entries, penned by Thomas Smith, the patriarch found sprawled in the parlor, his eyes wide with a terror that death could not erase, spoke of an escalating dread that had gripped the family in their final years. He had been acutely aware of the curse's accelerating tempo, the growing intensity of the bizarre occurrences within the house leading up to the final eclipse. His handwriting grew erratic, his words filled with a chilling, resigned premonition of the inevitable end. He detailed the inexplicable reddened seepage on the walls, describing it not as a natural decay, but as a weeping of the house itself, a visceral manifestation of the accumulating anguish, fear, and dread within its ancient timbers. It was the house, he wrote, bleeding out the trauma of centuries, preparing for the final bloody feast. The historical documents painted a harrowing picture of a family caught in a tightening noose, a legacy of ancient betrayal demanding its ultimate recompense. The investigators now understood that the Smith family had been living on borrowed time, each generation hoping futilely to break the cycle, to somehow appease the vengeful spirit of Elara Croft, or perhaps the darker, unspeakable entity she had inadvertently invoked with her dying curse. The horrific tableau discovered at dawn was not a random act of violence, but the meticulously executed final chapter of a centuries-old debt, a blood price collected with chilling precision. The Smith family had become the final sacrifice, the culmination of a forgotten pact that had finally demanded its due under the cold, silent, judging gaze of the final eclipse. The tension in the command center was palpable, a heavy silence punctuated only by the rustle of papers and the hum of equipment. They were no longer investigating a simple crime scene. They were unearthing a historical horror, a chilling narrative of human cruelty and supernatural retribution, inextricably woven into the dark, forgotten corners of American history. And the chilling question lingered, a cold hand gripping their hearts. If this ancient evil, born of betrayal and sustained by suffering, could consume an entire bloodline so completely, what was to stop it from reaching beyond the cursed walls of the Smith home and into the world beyond? The answers, they now realized, lay buried deep within the shadowed origins of the nation itself. The oppressive atmosphere within the Smith residence had, in the days following the initial discovery, only intensified. What began as a chilling silence, punctuated by the mournful creaks of an aging structure, slowly gave way to something far more insidious and active. Dr. Aris Thorne, a man whose career had been built on dissecting the cold logic of human depravity, found himself confronting an illogical terror that defied every scientific postulate. His team, a carefully selected group of forensic specialists and historical researchers, were prepared for the macabre, for the darkest aspects of human nature, but not for the outright impossible that now began to manifest around them. The first documented anomaly was subtle, almost dismissible. A faint, cloying scent, beyond the expected dust and decomposition, began to permeate the lower levels of the house. It was described by one of the junior investigators, a sharp young woman named Miller, as like old blood mixed with iron, and something profoundly organic, something that shouldn't be. This was distinct from the faint metallic tang already noted in the initial forensic sweep. This was a new, almost sickeningly sweet undertone that seemed to cling to the air itself. Thorne, initially attributing it to decomposition byproducts missed in the initial sweep, quickly dismissed that theory. The scent was pervasive, yet untraceable to any physical source. It seemed to emanate from the very air, growing palpably stronger as the team ventured deeper into the master bedroom, the undeniable epicenter of the Smith family's final gruesome tableau. Then came the visual disturbances, escalating from peripheral shadows to direct unsettling apparitions. The mirrors, omnipresent throughout the colonial home, continued to be a focal point of the most unsettling observations. While previously reflecting only distorted shadows, they now seemed to hold fleeting, almost subliminal impressions, brief glimpses of movement just at the edge of perception. Investigator Davies, a seasoned evidence technician with years of crime scene experience, reported seeing what he initially dismissed as visual static in the periphery of a large, ornate mirror in the hallway. Subsequent monitoring with high-speed cameras, however, captured momentary indistinct blurs of movement, too rapid to fully register with the naked eye, yet undeniably present on playback. It was as if something was attempting to coalesce within the reflective surfaces, a desperate, failed attempt at tangible manifestation. Simultaneously, the reddish substance, a viscous arterial hue, previously observed seeping from the walls of the children's room, exhibited a disturbing and accelerated escalation. Digital time-lapse photography now revealed its rapid, almost predatory spread, like a slow-moving tide of condensed dread. It pulsed with a faint internal luminescence under the infrared, defying the properties of any known organic or inorganic material. Its expansion was not uniform. It seemed to trace ancient, unsettling patterns on the plaster, symbols that hinted at forgotten rituals, disturbingly mirroring the very archaic symbols etched into the flesh of the deceased Smiths. The auditory phenomena followed, a chilling cacophony of quiet horror that gradually overwhelmed the silence. The house, once merely groaning under its own weight, now began to whisper. Not human whispers, but a low, guttural murmur that seemed to resonate through the very foundations, vibrating up through the floorboards. It was a language without words, a primeval drone that seemed to vibrate in the listeners' very bones, raising the hairs on the back of their necks. Microphones placed throughout the structure, originally designed to capture structural sounds for integrity analysis, instead recorded sustained periods of this unsettling hum, sometimes punctuated by faint, rhythmic thumping, like a distant, labored heartbeat echoing from within the earth itself. These sounds were sporadic, unpredictable, and always seemed to intensify when the team focused their investigation on areas directly linked to the Smith family's lineage documentation, particularly the brittle, leather-bound journals found in the study detailing their ancestral history. It was as if the house itself was reacting to their proximity to the terrible truth, actively resisting their efforts. One particularly harrowing incident occurred during an attempt to remove a large, heavy-framed portrait of a grim-faced colonial Smith ancestor from the main parlor. As Thorne and Davies carefully unmounted the frame from the wall, a sudden, sharp drop in temperature enveloped them. Their breath plumed visibly in the impossibly frigid air, and their gloved hands grew numb against the sudden cold. The cloying scent of old blood intensified, overwhelming their senses, forcing them to gasp, and the previously faint whispers rose to an agonizing, piercing crescendo, a sound that felt less like an auditory phenomenon and more like a physical assault on their eardrums, a painful pressure building behind their eyes. The portrait itself began to vibrate violently on the wall, the antique glass cracking under no apparent physical force. A grotesque, fleeting distortion warped the ancestor's painted face, a silent scream of unimaginable agony, contorting its features for a horrifying second before the glass shattered inwards with an explosive sound, scattering razor-sharp shards across the polished floorboards. Both men recoiled, shaken to their core, staring at the now empty, splintered frame, the air still impossibly cold, the abrupt silence that followed more terrifying than the preceding chaos. This incident marked an undeniable turning point for the investigative team. What had been anomalies, however disturbing, were now undeniable manifestations of an active, malevolent presence. Dr. Thorne, a man of science who had spent decades anchoring his understanding in empirical data, found his entire framework crumbling around him. His notes, meticulously detailed and always adhering to objective observation, began to reflect a growing desperation to understand, to quantify the utterly unquantifiable. He documented the team's shared physiological responses, elevated heart rates, measurable increases in stress hormones, and a pervasive shared sense of profound dread that clung to them, lingering even after they had retreated from the house each day. The reddish substance, now covering significant portions of the warped floorboards in the children's wing, seemed to pulse with a low, rhythmic light, mirroring the thumping sounds picked up by the audio recorders. It was almost as if the house was not merely a vessel for the curse, but a living, breathing organism, slowly, inexorably, revealing its true, terrifying nature, demanding to be witnessed. The evidence was accumulating at an alarming rate, painting a picture not of a cold case to be solved, but of an unfolding horror that refused to be contained. The Smith family's final eclipse was not just a historical marker, it was a trigger, unleashing something ancient and insatiable that now haunted the very spaces the investigators occupied. The team members were no longer merely objective observers, they were becoming unwilling participants in a macabre theatrical, an audience to the very phenomenon that had claimed the Smiths. The line between the objective and the terrifyingly personal had irrevocably blurred. The curse was not merely a historical footnote, a distant echo of past transgressions. It was a living, growing entity, feeding on the very air within the ancestral home, demanding more than just observation, demanding its immediate and devastating due. The house had begun to speak, not in human words, but in the chilling, undeniable language of pure, unadulterated terror. The team, led by Dr. Evelyn Reed, an expert in historical forensics and folkloric studies, had established a meticulous grid system throughout the Smith residence. Each inch of the decaying colonial structure was being systematically documented, catalogued, and analyzed. The initial shock of the crime scene had given way to a chilling sense of methodical horror, a creeping dread that transcended the grotesque nature of the deaths. The house, once a symbol of colonial endurance, now felt like a living tomb, its very walls exhaling a cold, ancient breath. The reddish substance weeping from the walls, first dismissed as a peculiar mold or oxidized piping, now presented a disturbing enigma. Preliminary lab results returned not merely inconclusive but baffling. Its composition hinted at organic matter, yet its cellular structure defied any known biological classification. It contained traces of iron, consistent with blood, yet lacked the DNA markers of any terrestrial organism. It was as if the house itself was bleeding, not from a wound, but from an inherent, ancient affliction, an unholy physiological process. Dr. Reed theorized it was a manifestation of the dwelling's slow, agonizing decay, a physical representation of the curse festering within its very foundations, a substance born of the spectral itself. The archaic symbols found etched on the victim's skin and smeared in the reddish substance across the warped floorboards were proving equally intractable. These were not the common sigils of modern occultism or the simplified markings of cult activity. Dr. Reed recognized fragments, faint echoes of pre-colonial pictograms, twisted alongside distorted puritanical religious iconography and early alchemical ciphers. It was a terrifying fusion, suggesting a syncretic belief system, perhaps one born of desperation and forbidden knowledge during a time of extreme religious fervor. Her research assistant, a young but exceptionally bright linguist, worked tirelessly to cross-reference them with forgotten texts from the Salem State Archives, uncovering obscure references to a marginalized community, a group of accused individuals whose practices extended far beyond the common accusations of witchcraft, hinting at a darker, more primordial pact. These symbols seemed to whisper of a deeper, indigenous spirituality corrupted, twisted into something malevolent by colonial fear and persecution. Their methodical search led them to the house's hidden compartments. Behind a warped panel in the master bedroom, concealed beneath generations of wallpaper and dry rot, they discovered a small lead-lined chest. Inside, nestled amidst crumbling velvet, lay a collection of journals and a single leather-bound grimoire. The journals, brittle with age, chronicled the Smith family's lineage back to the late 17th century, detailing generations of unexplained tragedies, sudden deaths, and persistent, gnawing misfortunes. The entries became increasingly frantic as the present day approached, speaking of recurring nightmares, inexplicable illnesses, and peculiar accidents, all meticulously linked to specific celestial alignments. They spoke repeatedly of a debt, a pact, and a payment due under the final shadow of the earth. The chilling realization began to dawn that the family had known, or at least sensed, their impending doom. The grimoire, however, was far more disturbing. Its pages were not merely written upon, but seemed to absorb light, turning the ink into a deeper, absolute black. Dr. Reed's gloved fingers traced the strange, spidery script, recognizing an early form of colonial vernacular, interwoven with Latin, and what appeared to be an archaic dialect of Algonquian, a language almost entirely lost. The chilling contents detailed a binding ritual, a desperate plea for protection, made by the original Smith patriarch during the height of the witch trials. He had sought to save his family from the hysteria, but the price, horrifyingly clear in the grimoire's stark pages, was not merely his soul, but the blood and life force of his direct descendants, exacted precisely when a total lunar eclipse coincided with a specific astrological alignment, an event that had just occurred. The grimoire explicitly stated that this convergence opened a gate, allowing an ancient entity to reclaim its due. The broken promise was laid bare, not a pact with the divine, but a bargain with something far older, something that predated puritanical Christianity and drew its power from the very land itself, twisted and corrupted by colonial desperation and fear. The grimoire spoke of a spirit, an entity of raw vengeance born of injustice and bloodshed, bound to the Smith bloodline, waiting for its climactic moment to reclaim what was owed. The symbol of this entity, a jagged crescent mirrored by a downward-pointing triangle, was consistently depicted on every page, strikingly similar to the marks found on the victims, but also eerily resembling geological fault lines mapped in the region. As these horrifying revelations surfaced, a palpable oppressive shift occurred within the house. The air grew perceptibly colder, even as the summer heat intensified outside. Shadows seemed to deepen around the investigators, subtly shifting in their peripheral vision, coalescing into indistinct shapes just beyond direct sight. Equipment began to malfunction erratically, cameras freezing, audio recorders picking up phantom whispers. A specialized spectral analysis device, designed to detect subtle energy fluctuations, registered anomalous readings that spiked dramatically whenever Dr. Reed read aloud from the grimoire, suggesting an unseen, malevolent presence reacting to the very words of its ancient contract. It was as if the entity was actively listening, its grip tightening. One of the younger forensic technicians, initially detached and clinical, began to exhibit signs of acute anxiety, reporting recurring nightmares of being watched by unseen eyes within the house. His unease was infectious, spreading a quiet dread through the ranks. Another complained of a persistent metallic taste in his mouth, a flavor he described as ancient rust, mixed with something he could not name, but which brought a wave of inexplicable nausea. The investigators, initially driven by scientific curiosity and a sense of duty, now found themselves battling a growing psychological toll, a terrifying realization that they were not merely observing a crime scene, but standing on consecrated ancient ground, unknowingly performing an archaeological dig into an active, malevolent curse. They were digging up something that had been patiently waiting, for centuries, beneath the very floorboards of American history. The final eclipse had not merely been a backdrop, it had been the key, the cosmic alignment that unlocked the true horror, initiating the final act of a generations-long tragedy. The question now was not just what happened, but what would happen, as the ancient evil, once confined by cosmic geometry, began to stir, sensing new vessels, new lives to claim within its spectral grasp, threatening to spill beyond the boundaries of the Smith property. They had opened a door and something had followed them back. The mounting evidence meticulously collected from the Smith residence had pushed the specialized investigative team beyond the boundaries of conventional criminology. Cadaveric spasms, limbs contorted into impossible configurations defying anatomical possibility, symbols etched not merely on the skin, but seemingly through the victim's very being, suggested a force beyond human comprehension. Forensic pathology could describe the what, but offered no explanation for the why. It was Dr. Aris Thorne, a leading American academic in ethnohistory and cultural anthropology, whose tireless descent into the archives of Salem finally began to illuminate the horrifying truth, bridging the gap between historical record and unspeakable terror. Thorne's investigation unearthed not merely dusty documents from forgotten puritanical proceedings, but fragmented whispers from an era shrouded in fear, paranoia, and a rigid, unforgiving piety. He meticulously cross-referenced colonial property deeds, long-dismissed court transcripts, and obscure church records that hinted at dealings far darker than simple land disputes. His critical breakthrough came not from an official declaration of guilt or innocence, but from a suppressed deposition dated from the height of the 1692 hysteria. This rarely seen document detailed the chilling testimony of Elara Blackwood, an elderly woman accused of witchcraft, who under relentless duress and facing imminent execution offered a desperate yet precise prophecy before her demise. Blackwood, a local herbalist and deeply respected seer among the indigenous peoples of the region, had been relentlessly persecuted by the then patriarch of the Smith family, Thomas Smith. A shrewd and avaricious Puritan landowner, Thomas Smith systematically sought to acquire her ancestral lands, leveraging the witch panic as a tool for dispossession. The deposition, dismissed by the colonial authorities as the delirious ravings of a condemned witch, spoke of a profound pact. Not with the Christian devil as the Puritans fervently believed, but with something far older, a terrestrial entity tied intrinsically to the very bedrock and ancient forests of New England. This entity, a primordial elemental force predating colonial settlement and the arrival of European colonists, was said to guard the fundamental balance of justice in the land, a spiritual custodian of natural order. Blackwood, facing an unjust death born of avarice and spiritual corruption, did not curse Thomas Smith out of simple malice or personal revenge. Instead, she invoked this impartial, primeval spirit, appealing to its fundamental nature to exact a precise blood price for the profound betrayal of trust, for the calculated destruction of an innocent life, and for the desecration of sacred ground. The curse stipulated with chilling foresight that the Smith lineage would prosper through successive generations, accumulating vast wealth and influence, a perverse form of fattening for the slaughter, until a specific celestial alignment. This moment, a total lunar eclipse coinciding with a rare planetary opposition, would mark the catastrophic culmination of their ancestral debt. On that designated night, the entity would claim the entire Smith bloodline, demanding their lives as the ultimate payment for the land unjustly seized and the human spirit utterly broken. It was a cold, precise form of cosmic, unyielding justice, patiently waiting centuries for its inevitable due. The archaic symbols found etched into the victim's flesh, initially baffling the seasoned investigators, were identified by Thorne as intricate variations of runic sigils. These were not the common hexes or simple wardings of village folk magic, but complex markers of a binding agreement, a spiritual contract that transcended generations. They were composite designs, blending pre-Christian European motifs with subtly altered indigenous American spiritual symbols, hinting at a shared esoteric knowledge, a blending of Old World terror and New World mysticism. The impossible configurations of the bodies, Thorne theorized with a chilling detachment that masked his own profound horror, were not mere post-mortem distortions or the result of human violence. They represented the very act of the entity consuming their essence, twisting their physical forms as it systematically drained their life force, leaving behind nothing more than hollowed, grotesque vessels. The inexplicable reddish substance weeping from the ancient walls of the Smith house, previously dismissed as a morbid fungal growth or a unique form of water damage, was definitively determined to be a complex compound of human hemoglobin and ancient, mineral-rich soil. It was the most visceral physical manifestation of the blood price being extracted, the house itself, built on stolen land, literally metabolizing the horrific, centuries-delayed transaction. The ancestral home, the very ground beneath it, was reclaiming its ancient due. The terror etched onto the investigators' faces was palpable, a chilling understanding dawning that went far beyond mere psychological trauma. They were not simply observing the aftermath of a horrific crime scene. They were witnessing the precise, meticulously executed fulfillment of a forgotten prophecy, the grim and unyielding precision of a centuries-old cosmic debt being settled. The Smith family, unknowingly living within the oppressive confines of this ancient pact, had been groomed for generations, their prosperity merely serving as a prelude, fattening them for the ultimate, macabre sacrifice. Their lives, their very existence, were nothing more than a ticking clock, calibrated to the cold, indifferent rhythm of the celestial spheres. The confrontation was not with a visible antagonist or a tangible threat to be apprehended. It was a devastating intellectual and existential collision with the terrifying, undeniable reality of what had transpired. Dr. Thorne stood amidst the evidence, the faint scent of copper and decay clinging stubbornly to his clothes, a profound and horrifying revelation etching itself onto his academic mind, forever altering his perception of history and reality. The historical records, once dry and academic, now throbbed with a malevolent ancient life, inextricably intertwining with the grotesque scene of death before them. The curse was not a metaphor. It was a tangible, ravenous entity, dormant for centuries, now grimly sated, but leaving behind an unbearable, haunting truth that some debts, forged in the crucible of human cruelty, betrayal, and historical injustice, demand a payment far exceeding any earthly currency, a blood sacrifice rendered under the cold, indifferent gaze of the cosmos. The hidden horror of the Smith family was not a singular, isolated event, but the devastating final act of a slow, inexorable reckoning, demonstrating with chilling clarity that the past, in its darkest, most vengeful forms, never truly dies. It merely waits, with unholy appetite and chilling precision, for its destined moment to claim its final, horrific pound of flesh. The dawn that broke over Salem following the final eclipse offered no solace, only the chilling tableau of what remained of the Smith lineage. The official reports, meticulously sanitized and ultimately classified, would attribute the grotesque scene within the colonial house to a series of escalating domestic incidents, fueled by psychological breakdown and a tragic collective delusion. Local authorities, overwhelmed and out of their depth, found refuge in the most readily digestible narrative, one that dismissed the archaic symbols, the inexplicable injuries, and the pervasive, cloying stench that clung to the very air as products of a deranged mind. But for the specialized investigators, the handful of experts brought in from outside agencies, the truth was far more insidious, utterly beyond the realm of conventional pathology. They had seen the weeping walls, felt the cold despair emanating from the warped floorboards, and documented the impossible configurations of the Smith family's final moments. Their findings, suppressed and officially disavowed, painted a picture not of human madness, but of ancient malevolence unleashed, a primal force awakened by a celestial alignment centuries in the making. The Smith ancestral home, once a beacon of colonial heritage, was swiftly declared uninhabitable, then quietly condemned. Public record stated structural instability, a convenient half-truth that masked the far deeper decay that had permeated its very essence. Attempts to demolish it met with peculiar resistance. Machinery malfunctioned, workers reported disturbing phenomena, and a persistent low hum seemed to vibrate from its foundations. Eventually, the property was simply abandoned, left to decay under the watchful, unblinking eyes of generations of local law. Today, it stands as a silent sentinel, a grim testament to a history too terrible to acknowledge, its darkened windows reflecting the same shadows that reportedly consumed the last of the Smith line. Locals whisper of figures glimpsed within, of guttural sounds carried on the wind, but no one dares to approach too closely. The legacy of the Smith family tragedy extends far beyond the confines of their cursed home. It is a chilling echo of America's shadowed origins, a reminder that the land upon which this nation was built holds secrets far older and more terrifying than any documented history. The Salem witch trials, often relegated to a dark chapter of superstition and mass hysteria, are, in the light of the Smith incident, revealed as a nexus of genuine peril, a moment when the veil between worlds thinned and promises, both sacred and profane, were irrevocably made. This documented case serves as a stark warning. It compels us to re-examine the very foundations of our understanding of reality, to question what truly lies beneath the veneer of progress and scientific explanation. For the Smith family was not merely unlucky. They were the inheritors of a precise, relentless reckoning, a blood price demanded not by God or man, but by something far more ancient and vengeful. Their story forces us to confront the possibility that some curses are not metaphors, but living, hungry entities that span generations, waiting patiently for the opportune moment. The investigators who bore witness to the full horror within the Smith house carry the scars of that night. Many left their fields, unable to reconcile the inexplicable with the empirical. Some retreated into silence, haunted by visions they could not erase. Their experiences underscore the profound psychological toll of encountering truths that shatter the very fabric of one's perception. The case remains open in the deepest, most secure archives, a ghost in the machine of official bureaucracy, proof that some events defy categorization, existing only as a chilling, unanswered question. The Macabre night. They died. Under the final eclipse is more than just a historical account. It is a profound journey into the heart of an intimate, generational evil. It compels us to consider the hidden agreements forged in the past that continue to shape our present. The Smith family's fate is a tragic testament to the weight of ancestral sin, a terrifying reminder that some debts are paid, not in currency, but in blood, under the cold, indifferent gaze of a celestial event. We at The Hidden Horror believe that these stories, the ones brushed aside by conventional wisdom, hold vital keys to understanding the true, underlying nature of our world. The Smith family's tragic end is but one chilling example of the many unexplained, documented cases that defy rational explanation and hint at a reality far more complex and terrifying than we dare to imagine. If this exploration into the unseen depths of American history has resonated with your own sense of curiosity and dread, we urge you to delve deeper. Subscribe to the Hidden Horror channel for more meticulously researched investigations into the unexplained and the unsettling. Share this story and others from our growing archive with those who question the comfortable narratives of our world. Engage with us in the comments below. Share your own theories, your own experiences with the inexplicable. Your insights are invaluable as we continue to shine a light into the darkest corners of documented American phenomena. Join the Hidden Horror community. Your support allows us to continue bringing these crucial, terrifying truths to light. We are committed to documenting the chilling weight of a nation's shadowed origins, one terrifying, true story at a time. The past, as the Smith family tragically discovered, is not merely a memory. It is an active, relentless predator, waiting for its moment to claim its due. Do you dare to look closer?